Hello, this is November 15th, 2025, and my first podcast talk in many months. Don't ask me why. But recently I ran across an interview that now has prompted me to comment on it. This is from GQ magazine. I guess that's Gentleman's Quarterly. It came across my news feed, and I'm glad it did, because it's an interview of Richard Gere, one of the most famous of the Tibetan Buddhist practitioners worldwide. An interview of him regarding a documentary that he's producing about the Dalai Lama. This is dated October 13th of this year and attributed to the interviewer's Derek Lawrence. And so I will be reading from it and commenting on some things about Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. They're comparing and contrasting. So I'll just start reading from the article itself. This Derek Lawrence says, the Golden Globe winning actor opens up on his journey with Buddhism, the documentary Wisdom of Happiness, and the sides of the spiritual leader we've never seen. Oh, that's provocative. So the documentary is titled Wisdom of Happiness. It hasn't come out yet to the public, but I definitely will be wanting to see it. And he begins, some movie stars use their clout and popularity as a way to gain access to exclusive events or restaurants. Then there's Richard Gere, who turned his successful acting career into a way to meet and then become a student of the Dalai Lama. Now, more than 40 years after they were first acquainted, His Holiness is stepping into Gere's arena as the star of his new film. He goes on, the Wisdom of Happiness features the 14th Dalai Lama, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he says that for the entire 90-minute running time, only the Dalai Lama speaks, talking directly to the camera and giving background on himself. That's unusual, isn't it, for a documentary? Just the subject of the documentary to do the whole thing, facing the camera. And then they quote the Dalai Lama, reality itself is now telling us our way of thinking must change. He says, I'm taking the opportunity to share my dream for an energetic, long, bright future. This century should be a century of compassion, a century of peace, no more bloodshed. We should be we rather than we and they. Our life very much depends on hope. That's the end of his introduction, the Dalai Lama's introduction. Then it just says, ahead of the U.S. theater release of the documentary, Gere discusses his 50-plus years in Buddhism, the need for this film as the world falls off a cliff, and why His Holiness is not that different from your favorite uncle. So now the first question. Before we get into the specifics of the film, I'm curious to discuss what led you here. Where did your journey to Buddhism begin, and what drew you to it all those years ago? And then just a little here in Richard Gere's reply, he says he grew up in a Methodist house with deeply compassionate people. He said that everyone thought his father was going to be a minister. He didn't become a minister, but he was very involved with the church. And for most of his life, insurance was his profession. And he sold insurance like he was a minister. He was protecting people. And Gear says a little more about how appreciative he was of his father. His father had just died a month before this interview at the age of 101. So then Gear continues. So I grew up with that side, that is, that spiritual side, being stimulated. As a child, I would ask questions like, what am I? What is this universe? Why does everyone on some level seem to be frustrated or miserable or angry? As I left college and became an actor in New York, he went to Syracuse University, I started taking it more seriously and really reading and thinking about it. Zen Buddhism was the first system that struck me, and I was lucky to find good teachers in New York to study with. So most of my 20s was having a daily meditation practice in the Zen tradition. Question: how did you first cross paths with the Dalai Lama? I had an impulse to meet the Dalai Lama, who I had never really thought about that much. I had some romantic idea about who the Dalai Lama was. I ended up going to Dharamsala, India, in the foothills of the Himalayas, where the Dalai Lama was living in exile. It was quite a difficult trip to get there, and it was during a monsoon. Just muting my phone, excuse me. And it was during a monsoon. I spent several weeks in that community, and then I met His Holiness, and he got me right over most of the silliness that everyone has when they meet him, and this outsized expectation that he's going to enlighten you and you'll leave there on a cloud. And so that didn't happen. And it says here, he laughs when he says that. Just a little personal note here. That was when I did go to a meeting with the Dalai Lama about, 30 years ago, and a small group of Western Buddhist teachers from North America and Europe, and it was the most punishing trip I've ever had, and many trips. And then Gear continues talking about this first trip he had to Dharamsala. He asked his brother, that is, the Dalai Lama asked his brother, who I was staying with, who is this guy? And his brother said, he's a pretty well-known American actor, to say the least. So he started asking me about emotions and making these connections between me as a professional actor, manufacturing these sometimes very negative, afflictive emotions, and where do they come from? And the discussion went to the fact that maybe we're also manufacturing emotions in our real life. Like they aren't innately there, they're just the way our mind works in that moment. And the profundity of that is still something I'm working on, of how we can work with the afflictive emotions, go to the root of where they come from, transform the energy of them into something that's positive and joyous and potentially blissful, and ultimately turn that energy into wisdom. So, a couple of things I'd like to comment on here. This idea of actors manufacturing them, yes, Actors manufacture them. You can bring them forth. Recently, I heard an interview of Tim Robbins, another Hollywood actor who's we haven't heard much, seen much in the last 10 or 20 years, but he was being interviewed on NPR. I was in the car at the time, so I didn't record much of it. But the interviewer asked him, the topic came up of working with prisoners. This is probably his most famous movie was the Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank Redemption. I think that was with Morgan Freeman, and the question to him was, do you work in prisons? Do you use your acting experience as a prison dharma? And he said, yes. What I've been doing now for some years is not performing for the prisoners myself, but having the prisoners, those who volunteer, having them come up and perform themselves. And then he detailed that. He said, we asked them to consider 4 emotions: love, happiness, unhappiness, love, and fear. Now, I'm afraid I just can't remember what the 4 were. Basic emotions. That's the key thing. Basic emotions that we've all had. And he talked about how it requires them to learn that these emotions, these basic emotions, positive and negative so-called emotions, how they come and go, how they can switch, how the actors can move from one to the other. That's what they have to do. That's the challenge. That's the training. Is on stage, their little stage there in the prison, they have to switch all of a sudden from say anger to sadness. And Tim Robbins went on to say that it has proven to be quite a change for them. He said you can really see it, that they learn that with anger, for example, this is he said the predominant kind of mask that the prisoners have to maintain in prisons, that they don't have to be stuck there, that they can take off that mask and they can then change that way. It was pretty intriguing, really. What caught my eye here in this response of the Dalai Lama, back to that, was him saying that we can work with the afflictive emotions, go to the root of where they come from, and transform the energy of them. And how, no doubt in my mind, that's an effective practice. It's an effective Tibetan Buddhist practice. But how in Zen, on the other hand, we're not really working with them except to learn not to dwell in them. That's the work. Not cling to them. I wouldn't know what gear means by working with them, but many of us have learned, especially in Sesshin, it's a matter of neither clinging to them nor rejecting them, but experiencing them fully. And in doing that, in experiencing the anger, the sadness, the grief, the fear, that enables them to move through us and not get stuck in us. So that's the working with the emotions is best put in the negative, neither clinging to them nor denying them or rejecting them. And that's where the transformation comes in. I'm just saying this is a different way of, a different kind of Buddhist practice. At the risk of having told this story too many times, here we go again. When I was in college, just getting my practice off the ground, my Zen practice, I was still living in Michigan, and Gary Snyder came through town, and he agreed very generously to meet with our little Ann Arbor Zen group. And he said he would have breakfast. We could join him for breakfast. And it was a very impressive morning. He was a great inspiration. He had spent 8 years in a Rinzai Zen monastery in Japan, and it showed. He was a flinty, enormously disciplined, keen man. He's a great poet. He was one of the most famous American poets of the 20th and 21st century. Many of you know the name Gary Snyder. But anyway, during the question period, he invited us to ask questions after he finished his porridge. Someone who was braver than I was, someone in our group said, what's the difference between Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism? And he was generous enough to actually give us his sense of the difference. And here it is. He says, imagine the mind as a great lake or pond. Let's make it Chapin Pond. In Tibetan Buddhism, you make your way to the bottom very slowly and thoroughly. And by that, he said, he meant you explore it. You explore the contours of the pond all around. You explore the vegetation of the pond, even maybe the turtles, going back to Chapin Mill, the turtles, whatever fish there are there, everything about the pond. You take your time exploring all those things, you becoming acquainted with them, and so it takes quite a while to get to the bottom of the pond. Once you get there, then you really know that pond. You know your mind. And then he said, whereas in Zen, and again, he's speaking from years of Zen training, you dive straight down. You want to get to the bottom directly. The steep path. And so you can reach the bottom. We call that Kensho in Japanese Zen. You can reach the bottom, and then the exploration, the refinement, and the getting to know the mind is on the way back up. And I think that difference is reflected here in him talking about working with the emotions, transforming them. Whereas in Zen, we just acknowledge them, we see them, we don't want to be blind to them, but neither do we want to dwell in them or try to somehow solve them. And then that idea of transforming the afflictive emotions into what he says is something positive and joyous and potentially blissful. And that's not Zen. In Zen, by neither clinging to them, our emotions or our thoughts, same thing, neither clinging to our emotions and thoughts, nor denying them, rejecting them, we come to see through them. That's the transformation. It comes from seeing through them, seeing that there's nothing permanent there, that our emotions, our desires, and our anger, and our fear, and so forth, that they come and they go. In Zen, it's seeing these states of mind, emotions, seeing them as impermanent, evanescent, not replacing the negative with the positive. It's not, we don't do visualization practices or prayers in Zen, but seeing through them. And again, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. What a foolish thing that would be. It's different strokes for different folks. Those who have more of an affinity with the Tibetan style will flourish with that practice, maybe more than Zen, and vice versa. I think as we go on, you can appreciate what an example, what a model of practice Richard Gere is, of Tibetan Buddhist practice. Next question to Richard Gere. You've had the opportunity to learn from the Dalai Lama for decades. What kind of impact has that relationship had on you? And then Gere says, none of this stuff just happens. We don't change like that. We might get zapped in some way, but that's not change. Change takes time. I'll repeat that. Change takes time. And it is the continuity of these things that is the persisting, the continuity of these things, of thinking about them, practicing, going down different pathways of exploring who we are, what we potentially are, and how we enhance those difficult emotions as we're transforming or letting go of the negative stuff. Again, thinking about them, no, that's not what we in Zen do. He says it takes us into bad places. I would say, again, I think of Sesshin. Sesshin is a deep dive into our nature, and our nature, we come to see, has some pretty bad qualities to it. And he says we also start to see that in ourselves, and we come to see it in others. I don't know what could be more humbling than sitting in silence for 7 days, or even 4 or 2, because we can't run from ourselves, and we see features of our personality and our character that we can't avoid seeing. And it is humbling. But again, just for fun, to draw the contrast with Zen, we'll get into that in this next paragraph. He goes on. The relevance of this film is these things that we're talking about, the negative emotions, the self-cherishing, the tribal stuff. There's nothing innately there that makes us a Democrat, a Republican, a human being, an animal. These are all mental states that come and go, and we can control that kind of thing. Let me just insert that we control it by not clinging, neither clinging nor denying these states. But we're absolutely in Zen practice, we're not trying to control anything. He says they're just labels on basic consciousness, basic awareness. By the way, this term he uses, self-cherishing, is a very rich, really potent word. Our self-cherishing, much better, I think, than our egoistic features. Gira goes on, His Holiness is focusing on what is the basic thing of who we are, and to him we are kind, generous, and compassionate. And our society says the opposite, that this is a dog-eat-dog world, which leads us down into a wormhole of where we are right now, where nobody trusts each other, everyone hates each other and is angry and afraid all the time. But that is a hallucination on who we are, which is kindness, compassion, and love. These kinds of gooey things seem silly, but they're actually profound as to who we are as individuals and who we can become as a society and culture. Yes, who are we? Now, I wouldn't venture to make the assertion that we human beings are primarily kindness, compassion, and love. I know what he means, that those things are liberated, they're actualized when we are free of our conditioning. But this true nature of ours is beyond anything we can say, beyond kindness, compassion, and love. We always have to be very careful in Zen when we claim to know who we are. Even our founder, Bodhidharma, didn't make that claim. You know the story of when the emperor, Chinese emperor, met him in the 6th century and asked him, "Who are you? Who's standing before me?" And his famous words that continue to reverberate today was just, "I don't know." He didn't say, "I'm compassionate in my true nature, I'm compassionate, I'm kind, and I'm loving." He said, "I don't know." No limits, no definition. This phrase, who we are, we need to see through self-identity. I would say that's one of the scourges of contemporary life, fueled by social media, is this need to claim an identity. In Zen, we would say that when we've seen through the we, which also means the I and the me and the my, when we've seen through the we and the are, remember he says who we are, that's what leaves us with hope. Let me restate that. Awakening reveals that there is no I or we or me or my. There's no fixed entity there, here. And the same with the verb are or is or be. It's at every moment, again, back to the evanescence, every moment we're being reborn. There's no self that we're stuck with, no we that we're stuck with, no no one either existing nor non-existing. And when we see this, we're left with the capacity to endlessly change. We see that there's no need to claim an identity, much less assert it in our daily lives. We get free of that. And that does leave us with hope, because the hope comes from recognizing that there's no one we're stuck with here, that we are energy in flux. What we are, I put that in quotation marks, what we are at any moment is reflected by our actions, our words, our thoughts. We don't need to have a notion about who we are. I think of Zen Master Rinzai saying, students today can't get anywhere. What ails you? Lack of faith in yourself is what ails you. Now, he must mean by that not lack of faith in yourself as a personality, as this body-mind complex that we see more and more is not fixed. He's talking about lack of faith in your true self. That's what ails you. And even true self, it'd be a mistake to think of that as, oh, our true self is loving and kind and compassionate. Our true self is beyond anything, any descriptor. Hakuin says it in his chant in praise of Zazen. He says, the true self that is no self, no self. The interview continues. The interviewer asking, in the opening of the film, the Dalai Lama speaks about how this will not be an easy century, and he's definitely right about that so far. He talks about all the fear, anger, and hatred out there. Do you feel like this film and the Dalai Lama's message is arriving at a time where it's needed more than ever? Well, duh. But Gear didn't say that. I said that. But Gear says, when the directors brought the film to me, they were still figuring out exactly what it was. And we were approaching the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday, and I thought that this could be the centerpiece of celebrating His Holiness. You see the life and history of an extraordinary person. In the meantime, the world has fallen off a cliff everywhere. I travel a lot, and it's not just in the United States. People are living in a dissonant, crazy reality. So I think the film is actually functioning as medicine, as a corrective of, okay, time out. Let's look at who we are right now. How did we get here? How can we stop this? And imagine the positive universe, which is closer to the truth of who we are and who we can become as a world. Again, in Zen practice, there's no imagining, there's no visualizing. We don't say that the universe is positive or negative. So what is it then? What is it? Who are we? What are we? And then the next question, after watching the film, it's hard not to want to aspire to the vision that he sees, one of peace, happiness, and compassion. it kind of puts the onus on all of us to do what we individually can. And then Gir says something that also speaks to his long experience in the Dharma. He says, you're completely responsible for your experience of the world. Do you have a grievance towards someone or some group? Look at yourself. In what sense do you contribute to that problem? Someone said, we're living in an age of grievance. And I think that's only possible if we don't pause, turn the light around back on ourselves and see how we are partly, at least partly responsible. Gir says you're completely responsible for your experience of the world. Gandhi said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. Back to Gir's reply, and the beginning point of changing the world is changing yourself and doing the work. His Holiness is 90 years old now, and he still gets up at 3:30 in the morning to do hours of practice before he meets with people and has his functioning world. And he's the Dalai Lama. Imagine. Yeah, I heard this many years ago, that his daily schedule is to get up around that time. I forget what I heard, 3:30, 3 o'clock. And at the time I heard that he would start his day by sitting 6 hours. 6 hours of meditation or practice. Let's say practice. I don't know what the mix is in his practice. How much is meditation? How much is chanting and visualizing and so forth? But imagine that. So maybe it's not 6 hours anymore, but even hours. How many of us start our day with hours of practice? How many of us are heads of state, as he is? And Gir continues, for us, we find it hard to take 5 minutes where we can go and do some practice, and we think we're holy. His Holiness is optimistic but also committed. This is his life. This is authentically who he is. He's here to help everyone. Even who I would call the bad guys are saved in his universe. From his point of view, they're consumed by an illness whose root is self-cherishing, there it is again, and it's led them to ignorance, to behave and think and do things in the world the way they behave right now. But you can remove the illness, and then you're left with that basic human being who is that loving, kind child who wants to be held. I would add, and who wants to hold others, not just be held. The Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama is this larger-than-life figure, but as someone who knows him well, as you do, what might surprise people about him as an actual, real human being? And Gir replies, when we re-edited the film, we looked at all the raw footage, and there was this wonderful stuff where His Holiness was just coming into the room for the interview. He's 90 years old, so they were helping him sit down, and he had his glasses, and he didn't know where he was supposed to go. They had cut that out before, and I said, no, this is so human. We would all be like, okay, what am I supposed to do? What do you want from me? No, excuse me. He would all be like, okay, what am I supposed to do? What do you want from me? So we left all that in. I have my own story about Philip Kapleau, Roshi Kapleau. During Sesshin, I heard it secondhand from the Sesshin head monitor at the time. This is roughly 1974, and it's the only time I ever heard of Roshi Kapleau oversleeping from a rest period during Sesshin. But the head monitor figured it out and went in to wake him. And John told me that when he woke him, shook him gently, Roshi just said, "What do you want me to do?" Gear continues, "Even from the first time I met him, he's completely simple and direct and honest." And by the way, that's also my experience in those 5 days I spent with him and these others that I mentioned. He's the real deal. He's simple, he's direct, he's honest. He's a model of Dharma practice. Gear says there's no pretense about him whatsoever. So it's like talking to a favorite uncle, or your idealized version of your dad, or a college professor who you thought was just the greatest guy in the world. I don't think His Holiness would want to be romanticized. I certainly have seen him when he's frustrated and even flashed anger. Maybe someone was being disrespectful, or they weren't there on time. There have been moments when he was frustrated with me because he didn't particularly like something I had done. But these are moments that come and go quickly, and there's no residue left behind. And that's the difference between His Holiness and us. With him, it's just a moment. It's burned and cleaned, and he's right back into, I'm here for everyone completely. This is also the mark of someone very developed in Zen practice. Harada Roshi said that the anger of the enlightened person is like snow falling on wet pavement. It's not that there's no anger ever for even a second or two, but it doesn't last because she or he doesn't cling to it, doesn't cling to the thoughts that sustain the anger. And then the question, having now studied and practiced Buddhism for so long, and knowing that you view this as an ongoing process, where do you feel like you are now with what you're searching for and hoping to spiritually achieve? And Gear, no false modesty here, he says, I know I've gotten better. I'm still like a snake crawling on the ground compared to these great lamas and yogis. I never consider myself close to their league, but it has helped me in real profound ways in terms of how I can behave in the world and with other people. I'm much more comfortable now with everything than I was when I started practicing as a 22-year-old. And part of that is just becoming an old dog, which I am, but it's also 55 years of daily practice. Same for me, 55. That's a lot of practice. And it's not like I come out of every meditation and think, I'm a blissful Buddha. And then he laughs. You do the practice, and sometimes you get to a credible place, sometimes you don't. It's a bit like the New York Stock Exchange. It goes up, and then it goes down, and constantly up and down. But then you look at it over 55 years, and you go, wow, I did really well. That's what I can tell people from my own experience, that if you do the practice with continuity, the best you can, after 55 years, you're going to be in a different place. When I read this, I thought of him saying, wow, I did really well. I thought of these these words of attributed to anonymous, but a preacher who was an ex-slave, had been a slave. He said, "Lord, we ain't what we want to be. We ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we gonna be. But thank God we ain't what we was." And then lastly, Gear turns the question on to the interviewer, and he says, "How did you see this film?" And the interviewer says he was sent a screener. I guess that's a preview. And Gear says this could be streamed, but we wanted it in theaters so that there was a communal experience. I've seen this screened with audiences in a movie theater all over Europe because we've opened there already, and there's a qualitative difference in the room at the end of the movie. People are different. It's a small opening, and it probably also closes within an hour or two, but there is a moment when the lights come up and people are internally transformed. And they also feel like, wow, these people around me feel like I do. These really are my brothers and sisters on some profound level. And maybe there's a community of us that can radically change the world if we all have that feeling that we're in this together. This is what he describes, this communal experience of seeing it with others in a theater, made me think of how the advantage of going to Sesshin in person, sitting with 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 other people in one room. Doing Sesshin or daily sitting online can't compare to that. Now, of course, if we can't join in sitting with others, whether in Rochester or anywhere else, then great, we've got a way to kind of simulate that online. But I would urge anyone who has the chance, who can go to an in-person sesshin, to do that. It's a whole different experience. Well, our time is well up, and I just want to say again how really with great respect this great respect I have for Richard Gere based on this interview. I think his humility and his devotion, his faith speaks for itself, and he will be someone I continue to look up to. Thanks for listening.